Why are you wearing my shirt? Daniel stood frozen in the middle of his living room, his eyes fixed on the woman before him. She turned from the kitchen, calm, as if everything were completely normal. But for him, it was unbelievable, because she was his CEO. The oversized flannel shirt she wore was definitely his. There was no mistaking the pattern. Daniel tried to recall last night, but there was only a blurry void in his mind, no clear memory, no explanation. She looked at him, her gaze steady. "Don't you remember last night?" she asked. Daniel realized nothing was simple. Daniel Hayes was 35 years old, but his hands told a story of a much harder life. They were calloused, steady, and permanently stained with the faint, metallic scent of industrial oil and copper wire. Daniel was a master systems technician at Carter Tech, a high-growth firm known for its aggressive innovation and cutthroat culture. He was the kind of employee who existed in the shadows by design. He was excellent at his job, fixing the complex server racks and massive cooling systems that kept the company's digital heart beating, but he never sought the spotlight. His real life began at exactly 5 p.m. every day when he picked up his daughter Mia from the elementary school gates. As a single father, Daniel had mastered the art of survival and discipline. He was the man who packed the perfect lunches, remembered every dental appointment, and avoided office politics at all costs. Since the day his wife, Sarah, had passed away 4 years ago, Daniel had become a shield for Mia. He rarely drank, he never stayed out late, and his world was safe, predictable, and quiet. On the other side of the corporate glass was Olivia Carter. At 30, she was the youngest CEO in the industry, having taken over Carter Tech after her father's sudden health crisis. Olivia was brilliant, cold, and possessed an ironclad control over her emotions that earned her the nickname the Ice Queen. However, behind the tailored Italian suits and $10,000 watches, she was drowning. The board of directors was breathing down her neck, and the company was in desperate need of a massive partnership contract with a venture capital group known for being unpredictable and dangerous. The upcoming negotiation wasn't just a meeting, it was a survival summit for the future of Carter Tech. The potential partners, led by a man named Marcus Sterling, were old school, aggressive, and notorious for playing psychological power games. They preferred informal settings, late-night dinners with heavy drinking, to test the stamina and vulnerability of their associates. Olivia knew she needed someone on her team who understood the technical fine print but remained grounded. Surprisingly, her lead engineer recommended Daniel Hayes. "He's the most reliable man we have," the engineer had told her. "He doesn't crack under pressure, and he sees things others miss." Daniel was incredibly hesitant when the request came directly from the CEO's office. He didn't like the world of high-stakes corporate social climbing. He certainly didn't like the idea of a late-night dinner at an upscale rooftop restaurant where wine flowed more freely than logic. But he knew his job was on the line, along with hundreds of other employees' livelihoods, if this deal fell through. He accepted the mission for the sake of the company. On the evening of the dinner, Mia walked Daniel to the door. She reached up and straightened his collar with her small, delicate hands, her face serious. "Don't drink too much juice, Daddy," she whispered, confusing the champagne she saw in movie trailers with her own apple juice. "And come back for my bedtime story." Daniel knelt and kissed her forehead, promising he would be home soon. He felt a strange weight in his chest, a premonition of chaos that he couldn't quite name. When he arrived at the restaurant, the atmosphere was already thick with a suffocating tension. Olivia looked stunning in a black dress, but Daniel could see the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her hands as she adjusted her tablet. This was the first time he had ever seen her outside the sterile, white hallways of Carter Tech. She looked vulnerable, though she was trying her best to hide it behind a mask of professional arrogance. As Sterling and his associates arrived, loud, arrogant men who viewed everyone else as a means to an end, Daniel realized that tonight wasn't going to be about technology at all. It was going to be a test of character. The rooftop wind was cold, but the predatory looks from Sterling were colder. He didn't look at Olivia like a business partner. He looked at her like a prize to be broken. Daniel shifted his weight, his protective instincts as a father and a former technician clicking into place. He was out of his element, but he was exactly where he needed to be. He watched the first bottle of wine being uncorked, and he knew that the quiet life he had built for himself was about to be turned upside down. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. The dinner was a calculated nightmare masked by silver plates and expensive crystal. Marcus Sterling was a predator in a tailored suit. He didn't want to talk about server capacity, global scalability, or encryption protocols. Instead, he wanted to see how much Olivia Carter could handle before she lost her composure. Every 10 minutes, a new bottle of vintage wine was ordered. Sterling and his associates were relentless, pushing glass after glass toward Olivia, framing it as a gesture of goodwill and a sign of respect for the deal. Daniel sat at the edge of the table, his eyes scanning the room like a security camera. He remained professional, answering technical questions with a precision that clearly annoyed Sterling. He was watching Olivia closely. He saw the way she sipped her wine, her face turning a ghostly shade of pale as she fought to maintain her dignity. She was trying to prove she could play in the big leagues, but she was being bullied by men who had turned business into a blood sport. When Sterling noticed that Daniel was barely touching his glass, his focus shifted. He saw a systems technician, a man he considered expendable staff, and decided to use him as a target for his amusement. "Come on, Hayes," Sterling sneered, pouring a heavy, tall glass of expensive scotch. "You're on the winning team, aren't you? Or is the CEO paying you to be a babysitter tonight?" The group of associates erupted in laughter, a cold and hollow sound that echoed through the restaurant. Daniel felt the heat rise in his neck. He looked at Olivia, who gave him a subtle, pleading look. She didn't want him to cause a scene that would blow the deal, but she also looked like she was on the absolute verge of collapsing. Daniel realized in that moment that if someone didn't step in, these men would keep pushing until Olivia made a public mistake that would haunt her career and her family name forever. Daniel made a silent, definitive choice. He reached out and took the heavy glass from Sterling's hand. "If it's about the deal, I'll represent the technical side of the goodwill," Daniel said, his voice deep and steady. He downed the glass without flinching. Then another, and another. He began to drink on Olivia's behalf, shielding her from the social trap Sterling had set. The partners grew frustrated. They wanted to see the CEO lose her grip, not a technician they didn't care about. They began to mock Daniel openly, calling him the hired help and the drinking donkey. They laughed at his work clothes and his modest background. Daniel absorbed the insults along with the alcohol. He was a wall of stone, taking every blow meant for Olivia. As the night progressed into the early hours, Sterling became more aggressive. He moved his chair closer to Olivia, his hand lingering too long on her shoulder, his whispers becoming increasingly disrespectful. He began to hint that the contract wouldn't be signed unless Olivia was willing to discuss the details in a more private, intimate setting. The air in the room became suffocating. Olivia froze, her iron control finally snapping. Her eyes filled with a mixture of rage and terror. "The contract is about the technology," she said, her voice trembling. "Not about this." Sterling laughed, his hand moving to her waist. "Everything is about this, Olivia. Don't be a child." Daniel Hayes, despite the heavy fog beginning to cloud his brain from the sheer volume of alcohol he had consumed to protect her, saw the exact moment Olivia's spirit broke. The single dad, the man who had spent years avoiding trouble, stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't throw a violent punch. He simply placed his heavy, calloused hand on Sterling's wrist. His grip was as strong as the industrial hydraulic machines he repaired daily. "That's enough," Daniel said. His voice was low, vibrating with a quiet danger that made the entire table go dead silent. "The lady said she's finished, and so is this dinner." Sterling's eyes flared with a murderous rage. "Do you have any idea who I am? You just cost your company billions. You're a dead man in this industry, Hayes. You'll never work again." Daniel didn't flinch at the threat. He ignored the shouting and the frantic looks from the waiters. He helped Olivia up, guiding her away from the table. As they reached the sidewalk outside, the cold night air hit Daniel like a physical slap. He had pushed his body past its absolute limit to save her dignity. Daniel felt the world begin to spin uncontrollably. Blackness started to creep into the edges of his vision. He had done his job. He had protected his CEO. But as the world faded away into a blurry haze, he had no idea that the real story and the real danger was only just beginning. Would you step in, like Daniel? Comment, respect if you understand. The ride back in Olivia's car was a chaotic blur of neon streetlights and the overwhelming scent of her expensive perfume. Daniel was leaning heavily against the window, his consciousness slipping in and out like a failing circuit. Olivia was driving, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were bone white. She wasn't thinking about the failed dinner or the angry board members. She was thinking about the man sitting next to her. No one had ever defended her like that. Not her father, not her previous partners, and certainly not her colleagues. Daniel suddenly sat up, his eyes bloodshot but burning with a strange technical intensity. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice thick and raspy. Don't you dare sign it." Olivia glanced at him, her heart racing. "Daniel, you're not well. We need that capital to stay afloat. The board will fire me if—" "No," Daniel interrupted, his technical brain firing through the alcohol like a backup generator. Clause 4.2 and the hidden Appendix B on page 84 of the digital draft. It's not a partnership. It's a predatory acquisition. They aren't investing money. They're Trojan horsing our infrastructure. If you sign, Sterling owns the core patents in 6 months. They'll liquidate Carter Tech for parts. Everyone loses their jobs. Olivia, it's a trap." Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the car's air conditioning. She had read that contract 10 times and her high-paid lawyers had cleared it. But Daniel had spent weeks maintaining the very servers where those digital files were stored. He had seen the underlying metadata and the cross-reference legal holds that the lawyers had completely missed. He explained the technical sabotage in 3 short, perfectly logical sentences before his head slumped back against the seat, completely spent. Olivia realized with a jolt of pure terror that the man she had almost fired for causing a scene at the restaurant had just saved her entire family legacy. If she had signed that night in the heat of the moment to save her pride, it would have been the end of everything her father had built. When they finally arrived at Daniel's modest apartment, he was completely out, blackout drunk, blackout exhausted. Olivia couldn't leave him in the car in that state, and she couldn't call a stranger to help a man in his condition. She knew Mia was inside. She used Daniel's keys from his pocket, and as the heavy door opened, a small girl in the star-patterned pajamas looked up at her with wide, intelligent eyes. "Is Daddy sick?" Mia asked, her voice small but remarkably brave. "He's just very, very tired, Mia," Olivia said softly, her voice filled with a tenderness she hadn't used in years. "He helped me with something very important tonight. He's a hero." Together, the billionaire CEO and the 7-year-old managed to get Daniel onto the sofa. Olivia intended to leave immediately, but as she looked around the small, humble apartment filled with science kits, hand-drawn pictures, and photos of a happy, glowing family, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. She saw a spill on Daniel's shirt from the restaurant. She saw he was shivering from the cold. She found a clean, oversized flannel shirt in the laundry basket to cover him, but in the process of moving him, she accidentally knocked a large glass of water over herself. Drenched and shivering, she saw another one of Daniel's shirts, a soft, worn-in cotton button-down. She ducked into the small bathroom to change, intending to just dry off and leave. But the sheer exhaustion of the last 6 months of corporate warfare finally caught up to her. She sat on the kitchen chair for just a minute to catch her breath and fell into the deepest, most peaceful sleep she had known since she was a child. The sun rose over the city skyline, casting long golden shadows into the living room. Daniel woke up with a headache that felt like a jackhammer vibrating against his skull. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and saw the remnants of the night. Then he saw her. Olivia Carter, the most powerful woman in the tech world, was standing by his small stove making coffee with practiced ease. She was wearing his favorite work shirt, the sleeves rolled up. "Why are you wearing my shirt?" Daniel asked, his voice cracking with confusion. He felt a wave of absolute panic. Did something happen? Did he cross a line he could never uncross? Olivia turned around, a small, tired but genuine smile on her face. "Don't you remember last night, Daniel?" He shook his head, the guilt and the blackout gap eating at him. I remember the restaurant. I remember Sterling being a monster. Everything after the car ride is just gone. I am so incredibly sorry if I did something. Olivia walked over and handed him a steaming cup of coffee. Don't apologize. You told me about the sabotage in the contract. You told me Sterling was trying to steal the company through a technicality, and then you fell asleep while trying to explain the physics of the server cooling system to Mia. Daniel blinked, the memories slowly returning like static on a TV. The contract, the Trojan horse trap. It was all there, Olivia said, her eyes shimmering with tears of relief. I spent the entire night on my laptop rereading the files while you slept. You were right, Daniel. You didn't just save my dignity at that table. You saved 300 families from losing their livelihoods. And you did it while being mocked by men who aren't fit to tie your work boots. Daniel looked at his calloused hands, then up at Olivia. The power dynamic in the room had shifted forever. She wasn't just his boss anymore. She was a woman who had stayed to watch over a technician and his daughter in a small, cramped apartment. The Ice Queen had melted, and Daniel Hayes was the only one who knew the woman underneath. Do you think Daniel knows what he really did? Tell us in the comments below. The following Monday, the atmosphere at Carter Tech was electric with tension. Olivia walked into the high-stakes boardroom and officially announced that the partnership with Marcus Sterling's group was canceled, effective immediately. The room erupted in pure chaos. Shareholders shouted. Senior vice presidents turned red with fury, demanding an explanation. This is professional suicide, Olivia, one man yelled. We need that capital to survive the quarter. Olivia stood her ground with a calm she had never possessed before. We don't need capital that comes with a hidden knife in the back, she said. She didn't reveal Daniel's role yet. She knew the corporate sharks and the media would tear him apart if they thought a lowly systems technician was influencing the CEO's billion-dollar decisions. However, secrets in a glass building never stay secret for long. Rumors began to leak within hours. A valet at the rooftop restaurant had seen Olivia driving a semi-conscious Daniel home. A nosy neighbor had seen a luxury car parked outside Daniel's apartment until dawn. The gossip mill at Carter Tech began to grind with a vicious intensity. Whispers followed Daniel every time he walked through the hallways to check a server. He's the CEO's new pet, people muttered. He's sleeping his way to a promotion. Daniel was called into the Human Resources office by the board's representative. He sat in the cold, windowless office, unable to defend himself effectively, because he still didn't remember the intimate details of the ride home or the conversation in the kitchen. He felt the heavy weight of the single dad label. If he lost this job, Mia's world would crumble. He felt a deep sense of shame, not because of what he had actually done, but because he couldn't prove his integrity to a world that only wanted a scandal. Olivia found out about the HR meeting and marched into the office, her eyes flashing with a fire that terrified the investigators. Daniel Hayes is under my personal protection, she declared, her voice echoing through the glass partitions. His position in this company is based on technical merit and a level of loyalty that none of you seem to have the capacity to understand. But her fierce defense only fueled the fire. The shareholders used the rumors to question her judgment. She's compromised, they whispered in the elevators. She's letting her personal life destroy our stock value. Olivia was faced with a brutal choice. Reveal the truth about the contract sabotage, which was still legally sensitive and could trigger a massive lawsuit, or let Daniel take the fall to save her own position as CEO. She looked at Daniel through the glass of his workstation. He was working on a failing server rack, his face calm, his focus entirely on the machine despite the people pointing at him from the hallway. He wasn't checking the gossip sites. He wasn't defending himself to his coworkers. He was just being a dad and a master technician. Olivia realized that for the first time in her life, she didn't care about the board of directors or the stock price. She cared about the truth. She realized that Daniel Hayes had given her back her company, and now it was her turn to give him back his dignity. Should Olivia reveal the truth to protect Daniel? Yes or no? 2 weeks later, the global news broke like a thunderclap. Marcus Sterling and his venture firm were placed under federal investigation for massive corporate fraud and Trojan horse acquisition tactics. Another tech company had fallen for the exact same trap Olivia had avoided, and they were finally speaking out. Olivia's decision to walk away from the deal was suddenly hailed by the media as the strategic masterstroke of the year. The stock price of Carter Tech didn't just recover, it doubled overnight. Olivia called an emergency company-wide meeting in the main atrium. She stood on the stage under the bright lights, but she didn't stand alone. She asked Daniel Hayes to join her. "Many of you have heard rumors over the last few weeks," Olivia said, her voice echoing through the glass-walled building. "And many of you question why I walked away from a billion-dollar deal that seemed like our only hope. I did it because of the man standing next to me." Daniel Hayes didn't just find a bug in a computer system. He found a bug in a human soul. He showed me that integrity is the only currency that actually matters when the lights go out. Daniel felt the eyes of his hundreds of colleagues change in an instant. The mockery and the whispers vanished, replaced by a stunned, heavy respect. He realized then that he didn't need to remember every single second of that night to know who he was. His actions had spoken for him when he was at his most vulnerable. As the meeting ended and the applause faded, Mia ran onto the stage, jumping into Daniel's arms. Olivia knelt down and smiled at the little girl, no longer the ice queen, but a woman who had found her heart. "Did your daddy do a good job?" Olivia asked. "He always does," Mia said proudly, hugging her father's neck. A real relationship began to form between Daniel and Olivia. It wasn't built on a drunken night or a corporate scandal. It was built on the quiet early hours in a small kitchen, over a cup of coffee, and the shared understanding that the world is a difficult place, but it's much easier when you have someone who will stand up for you when you can't stand for yourself. Daniel Hayes remained a technician. He liked the honesty of the machines. But he was no longer invisible, and Olivia Carter remained a CEO, but she was no longer cold. Together they realized that sometimes the things you don't remember are the very things that save your life and define your future. True character is revealed when the masks come off and the pressure is at its highest. Daniel Hayes didn't try to be a hero, he simply refused to be a bystander. He protected his CEO when she was vulnerable, and he saved his company when it was blind to its own destruction. The story reminds us that value isn't found in a fancy title or a massive bank account. It's found in the quiet courage to do the right thing when there is nothing to gain and everything to lose. Respect the people who keep the world running in the shadows, because when the lights go out, they are the only ones who know how to find the way home. If you believe that real strength is shown in difficult moments, comment respect. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel Iron Dad Stories for more powerful, true, and inspiring stories about everyday heroes. Thank you for watching.